Day of the Blizzard, Chapter 4. It was frightening being trapped so high above the street. To Katy, the railroad carriage suddenly became a crowded prison on wheels. Some people tried to leave the train and to walk back to the last station on the catwalk along the track, but the wooden planks were slippery. There was no guardrail, and the wind was blowing hard. Most of the passengers thought it was safer to stay right where they were on the train. As much as she wanted to leave, Katy thought so too. The stove at the end of the car kept the place snug and warm. Almost too warm with so many people. For a while everyone was in a good mood. Even to Katy it began to seem like quite an adventure. All around her, people were talking to each other as if they were old friends. But as time ticked away, many of the passengers became impatient. "I'll be late for work," someone said. "Why can't they clear the track?" someone else grumbled. "They should get us down from here," a woman complained. A man opened one of the train windows. "Help us!" he shouted as the people watching from the buildings next to the track. "Hey, you in there! Can't you help get us down?" Suddenly a boy's head appeared over the side of the track. "Over here, people!" he shouted. "Want to get down? I've got a ladder. 5 cents to use my ladder. I'll help you down." Passengers began to scramble for the exits at each end of the carriage. "Come on, let's get off," the woman next to Katy said. "I don't want to stay up here for another minute. I don't think it's safe." Katy didn't want to stay either. But 5 cents? That was a lot of money. It was more than her fare to go home. But there was no choice. She had to get off. Mamma was sick and home alone with the twins. She climbed down the high steps of the railroad car to the slippery catwalk below. There were more ladders along the track now, and their owners were raking in the money. Everybody wanted to be first. Some people swung easily onto the shaky ladders. Others backed off in fear. There was a lot of screaming and squealing. Katy clung to the side of the railroad car. There was so much pushing and shoving. What if someone pushed her right off the track? Now it was her turn. Katy dug her half-dime out of her pocket, but when she held it out to the boy, he shook his head. "No, you're just a girl," he said. "I don't take money from children. Come on, I'll get you down." He helped Katy over the edge. It was a long, steep way down. Katy could feel the ladder swaying. The wooden rungs creaked with each step. Her feet kept getting tangled in her skirts, but at last there was solid ground under her feet. Under the covering of snow she could feel the solid cobblestones of Second Avenue. Now she would have to walk. She'd walk along under the elevated tracks. At least they gave a little shelter from all that snow. She pulled her shawl closer around her and shoved her hands into her pockets. Something felt wrong. Something was missing. Where was her envelope? Katy froze. Her heart skipped a beat. She pushed her hand deeper into her pocket, but the envelope still wasn't there. It wasn't in the other pocket either. It wasn't in the pocket of her dress. Katy searched all 3 pockets again. She found a crumpled handkerchief in one, her change, and a paper-wrapped sour ball in another, but no envelope of any kind. "But that can't be," Katy thought. "I can't have lost it. I was so careful. I held on to it all the time." But had she? She'd used both hands to climb down from the track. It could have fallen from her pocket then. Katy ran back to the ladder. People were still climbing down from the train. The snow at the foot of the ladder was dirty and muddy. Anything dropped there would have been trampled into the slush. "But it must be here," Katy thought. "Please, please let it be here. I can't go home to Mamma without the money, and without the brooch." But what if it had fallen up there in the carriage or out on the track? What if the storm had blown it away? Or if someone else had found it? No, she mustn't even think such a thought. Katy dropped to her knees. The muddy snow soaked through her skirt and through her petticoat. But Katy hardly noticed. She dug in the snow with her hands, pushing the slush this way and that. People were stepping around her, but Katy paid no attention. When someone stepped on her hand, she hardly even noticed the pain. Her wet gloves were frozen stiff. Tears ran down her cheeks, but Katy went on digging. It had to be here. It just had to. But how could one spot a white envelope in the midst of all that white snow? "Hey, stop crying!" Someone pushed a soggy envelope in front of Katy's face. "Is this what you're looking for?" It was a boy who had helped her down. "It was right here," the boy said. He pointed to a spot at the foot of the ladder. "You almost buried it with your digging. What's in here, anyway? The way you're carrying on, it must mean a lot to you." He pushed the envelope into Katie's hands. "Here, you're in my customer's way," he said gruffly. "Better move on." Thank you so much." Katie could hardly stammer her thanks. She felt like throwing her arms around the boy. How could she show him how grateful she was? All she had to give him was her spare half-dime, and he looked as if he could use it too. His jacket was thin and torn. He had rags tied with strings around his feet. His gloveless hands looked red. She held out the coin she had offered him before. "Please take it," she said. "That's all I can give you to show you my thanks." But the boy shook his head. "Don't worry," he said. "I'm making plenty today." He tossed a handful of snow into the air. "Great stuff," he said happily. Katie smiled at him. "It looks nice," she said, "but I wish it would stop coming down." But the snow didn't stop. Already the spot where Katie had dug was covered by fresh white drifts. She was beginning to feel the wind again, too. It tore at her shawl, billowed her skirt, pushed against her so that she could hardly walk. She pushed on, clutching the envelope in her hand. With each step she sank ankle-deep into the powdery snow. She hardly felt her feet any more, but her soggy skirt was turning into a stiff, heavy weight which she had trouble dragging along. Only 5 more blocks, Katie thought to cheer herself. That's not too much. And it is only snow. But even Katie had to admit to herself that this wasn't just snow. This was different. There was so much of it. Mounds and mounds piling up right in the street. And the cold, that icy cold, it seemed to cut right through her coat and shawl and dress, right through to her very bones. And the wind almost seemed to have a mind of its own, playing games with her, nasty games, in which she was the loser. Screaming at her, it dodged from side to side, trying to block her way. Whichever way she turned, she couldn't escape its fury. She tried walking backward. She tried hunching over, walking bent low like the very old lady who lived on her block. But she couldn't outwit her enemy, the wind. It dodged in and out, slapping fistfuls of snow into her eyes until she was blinded by tears, making her chest burn, taking her breath away. Each icy breath seemed to cut her chest like a knife, and yet she was gasping for more. She still walked on. Lots of people were walking, right in the middle of the avenue. Everyone had trouble. Some people clung to the pillars of the L to keep from being blown down. Some had put paper bags with eye-holes over their heads to keep the chilly wind from their faces. Others huddled together in doorways for warmth. An old woman staggered and fell, almost disappearing into a snowdrift. A passer-by strained to get her back on her feet. Then they struggled along together. Everywhere, carts and wagons were stuck in the snow. Drivers unhitched their horses to lead their tired animals back to the stables. Some even tried to ride their saddleless horses back through the snow. Ahead, a horse car had been abandoned on its tracks. Some people used the empty carriage as a rest stop. Katie stopped too. She sank down on one of the wooden benches. What a relief to get out of the gale! But she couldn't rest long. It must be quite late. Much too late. Mamma was home alone with the twins. I must hurry, Katie thought. I must get back home. On the other side of the street, an uptown trolley was still running. It was so jam-packed with passengers that some nearly spilled out on either end. Others clung to the steps outside, holding on for dear life. The horses strained to pull their load through the snow. Foam bubbled up from their mouths. The driver kept using his whip to make them move on. Katie looked longingly at the passing car. Maybe she should ride back home. She still had the fare. But I can't give up, Katie thought stubbornly. Not after coming this far. Katie turned west. 1 block to 3rd Avenue. 2 or 3 blocks after that. On the side street there was no shelter at all from the falling snow, and there was no escape from the wind that shifted about. Sometimes it blew the snow straight into her face. Sometimes it pushed from behind. Tall drifts of it blocked her way. Telegraph poles leaned at crazy angles. Some of the wires dipped dangerously close to the ground. Here and there a fallen store sign stuck up out of the piled-up snow. Another corner to turn. But on 3rd Avenue, things were not any better. More windows shattered by the storm, falling shingles, or blowing debris. More fallen wires, more stranded wagons and carriages blocking the horse-car tracks. And more wind. Always more wind. Katy counted the cross streets. 46th Street, 45th, 44th. Now she really didn't feel her feet anymore. She didn't know how she kept walking. Here was the block she wanted coming up ahead. Now, where was that store? It had to be on the street. She couldn't feel her face anymore either. Katy thought she was crying, but she couldn't feel any tears on her cheeks. She stumbled on. Murray's grocery store. Mike's saloon. Nathan's tailoring establishment. The sign she wanted hung 2 houses further down. 3 golden balls. The sign for a pawn shop. Gotham Pawn Shop, it said. Harry Lemon. Prop. The window was filled with a jumble of goods. Old musical instruments, stacks of plates, glass vases, watches, eyeglasses, rings. Katy pushed at the door. She rattled the door handle. The door wouldn't budge. It was locked. Katy peered through the glass. There was no light in the store. It looked dark and empty. The store was closed. But it couldn't be closed. She had come so far. What about Mamma's brooch? Katy couldn't go home empty-handed. She pounded on the door with both fists. She could hear the noise, but she couldn't feel herself pounding. "Please, open up," she sobbed. "Please, someone be here." But the only answering sound was the rattling of hailstones against the plate glass windows.